great pleasure that I introduce our speaker for this Sunday, our own Stephen Fleming down here from Houston. Thank you very much, Stephen.
All right. So, the name of my talk is Exhuming the Authentic Self. Exhuming the authentic self. Because many of us have buried that essential essence of ours in order to fit in order to be accepted into community. So, how much of a question, the million-dollar question is, how much of our self-worth comes from ourselves, and to what degree does it originate with others? You see, that's somewhat of a litmus test that we can use to gauge what voice we are listening to. Are we listening to our inner voice? Or are we listening to the voice of opinion and voice of the external? And that's a question that each and every one of us must ask ourselves. It's a personal question. And from that question comes forth answers. Because we're not meant to fit in. We're a divine idea that was implanted by our source, by God, by our creator, by the Great Spirit, whatever name that you choose to give that all-encompassing presence, loving presence that is meant to uplift us and support us and guide us through this journey that we call life. But we are not meant to fit into ideals or other people's opinions of us. And when we do so, what accompanies later on through that process of wanting to fit in are feelings of loneliness, are feelings of depression, are feelings of not being enough. See, this is the beginning. This is abuse, or this is the beginning of abuse. When you abuse beautiful aspects of yourself in order to fit in to our idea of what other people think that we should do and how other people think that we should be. And in the world of psychology, abuse begins with the self. It begins when we abuse ourselves, and over time we begin to abuse others. And it's not that we're intentionally abusing ourselves or others. It's not that, but when we do this, we impact our self-image. Now, if we look out into the landscape of this country and see how so many groups seem to be polarized and tribal in nature as far as us versus them and this type of ideology, and wanting to attribute the state of this country to groups of people, whether it's, people on one political spectrum wanting to blame people on the other side, or whether it's people in a certain group that want to blame people in another group. This is all the systemic result of abuse, which starts at the level of self and then grows systemically into what we are seeing today. So before I begin, I'd like everyone to close your eyes. We're going to do a visioning exercise. I like to do visioning exercises. So we're going to do a visioning exercise. So I want you to imagine that you are standing in your backyard. And towards a section in your backyard, you see that there is a bright light that is emanating from a patch of grass that is in your backyard. Intuitively, you grab a shovel and begin to move to that section where there is a patch of light. As you begin to near this section, you begin to feel this feeling of peace and happiness as you get closer to this section where there's a blazing light coming through the grass. Once you get there, you begin to dig. And suddenly everything is enveloped in a white light, blinding you. All you see is white light. And then suddenly the white light is gone. And now what is replaced by that white light is a feeling of purpose, of happiness, of joy, of love, and of a presence where you realize that you are not alone. You may open your eyes. In the book of John, chapter 8, verse 31, it reads, "When Jesus said to the Jews who had believed in him, 'If you continue in my word, you are truly my disciples, and you will know the truth, and the truth will make you free.'" Now there's a metaphysical meaning to this passage, to this scripture. Truth abides in fullness in the very core of man's being. As his conscious awareness expands, he touches the everlasting truth. What seems new is but the unveiling of that which always has been. The truth is your authentic self. And your authentic self is the Christ. That's right. The same Christ that our elder brother Way Shore and master teacher taught about in first century Palestine. You see, people in the first century Palestine, they dealt with many of the same things that we have to deal with today. You know, they had bills, they had problems in society, they had things that were challenging them. They had desires to want to fit into their community. It was no different. We just have more technology today. That's about it. But we're dealing with the same things that they were dealing with in first century Palestine. This is an age-old situation. And so, Jesus, what he did was he uncovered his authentic self. Now, they didn't have the languaging that we have today. The word that he had, the best word that he could use was the Christ. He wasn't afraid of fitting in. He had no problem speaking his truth. He was bold. And the circumstances that he went through as a child and in his life helped to prepare him, because he still had choices to make in his life, and these choices could have either have added to what is known as his self-image, or they could have taken away from his self-image. And he chose to add, he chose to listen to that inner voice as opposed to the outer voice that is always telling you that you're not enough. Now, there are two aspects that truly impact our ability to experience our authentic self. And I'm going to talk about, we'll talk about Eric Butterworth. And then I'm going to go into a few things. Now, Eric Butterworth kind of talked about this in a way. He said, the very first step in the art of thinking is to know that we always have a choice. We can become the master instead of the slave. We can be a creative thinker instead of a reflex thinker. Taking responsibility for thought changes our life. But we must know that our thoughts are the cause of the problems in our life. Positive thinking is not just a programmed mind. We are not what we think. Rather, we are thinking what we think. The you that thinks what you think is more than the thoughts you're thinking. Positive thinking is continued. Positive thinking is being attuned to your potential. We do not need to program truth into our conscious mind, but to wake up to the consciousness to what already knows truth. John 8:32. And you shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. So in summary, what he was saying is that positivity and positive thinking awakens the mind to the authentic self. Negativity does just the opposite. Now in unity, we teach that heaven and hell are states of consciousness that we can experience. Now, these states of consciousness are directly linked to our self-image, and our self-image is based on our beliefs, what we believe about ourselves. Now, I talked about this in a previous talk. As a matter of fact, in my last talk, She'elah, inside, outside, and beyond, and I talked about how our beliefs impact the world that we experience. And I taught about the art of questioning our beliefs, and the art of, and the practice of questioning in general, because we must question. Because we don't know what the nature of something is. We don't know if the nature of it is true or false. But what is true is that if the nature of it is false, it will not hold up to questioning. If it is true, it will stand the test of time, no matter what you throw at it. So when you find a group of individuals or an organization or someone that doesn't want you to question, I would be suspect. So, all reality, which reality is just a fancy word for how we see things, okay? In psychology, the science of psychology, reality is based on how we perceive and interpret information that enters into our mind. No two individuals experience the same reality. That means that every person in here has a different version of reality. Now, there is a collective construct of what is reality, and these are things that we have assumed to be true, and we agree with each other on what is reality, and so there's a collective reality, yes, but there is also an individual reality that each and every one of us experience, and we're the only ones that can experience it, we're the only ones that can interpret it, and we're the only ones who have control over it. So potentially you can have two different people who have very similar lives and experience two completely different outcomes, two completely different realities. The difference is their self-images. That's the only difference. So, what does that tell us? That brings us to the importance of cultivating within us a positive self-image. That is paramount. And that is the difference between experiencing a state of heaven in spite of whatever happens, in spite of the events that happen, because these events and circumstances happen to us all. In spite of the fact that we have a pandemic, in spite of, if there's an earthquake, in spite of if there's a storm, or in spite of there's a tornado and things like that, we still have a choice in how we choose to interpret and respond to everything, and that determines our reality. So how do we cultivate within us a positive self-image? Let's get to it. Let's get to the good part. Let's talk about it. All right. First and foremost, it is important to avoid all forms of negative self-judgment. All forms. So, when you judge something, an aspect of yourself, to be good or bad, what you essentially do is create a dualistic personality. And so then what happens, so you identify basically, these parts of me are good, and these parts of me are not good. That's a dualistic personality. When that happens, what you end up doing is you end up showing the parts of your personality that you have coined good. And you end up hiding the parts of your personality that you have coined bad. So then at that point, you are not a whole person anymore. So you are now walking around just showing aspects of yourself that you have pre-approved because they are good, and you are hiding aspects of yourself that are bad. What this does is this impacts your way of seeing. What this also does is this creates an unhealthy consciousness. Because you are now hiding aspects of yourself that you naturally are meant to express. So you're restricting yourself. Now, these aspects of yourself will still manifest in other areas of your life without you controlling it in the form of a shadow. Study Carl Jung. It will still manifest, and you won't have any control over it at this point. That is why it is essential Because you see, all aspects of yourself are not meant to be evaluated in the same way. Why is that? Because they serve different purposes. They don't all have the same purpose. We were made in the image and likeness of God. Okay? So if we're made in the image and likeness of God, does that mean that God has that part of God is bad and part of God is good? Okay? God is wholeness. So God lives in order as well as the chaos. All things in the universe work together for my highest good. That is the number one principle of the universe. Not just the good, or not just the things that feel good. So the things that feel good are important. It's important to feel joy. It's important to feel happiness. It's also important to not be complacent and to grow and to express more of what we're meant to express. So you know something? That's why we experience chaos. That's why we experience challenges. Because it's important for us to grow. Because if we have our choices, if we have it our way, we'll just have all the good. We'll just have all the good and just skip the bad, and we'll just all stay small. And that's just how we are. We prefer just the good feelings. We just want to feel good. We just want to feel happy. We want to go around and feel happy and joyful and stuff like that. And we don't want to be challenged. We don't want to be tested. We don't want to be pushed. And so because we evaluate that negatively, because we don't want that, we don't see the gift in it. Well, it's the same thing for us. Same thing for us. Same thing for the aspects of us. There are aspects of us that are not meant to be evaluated the same way. They have different purposes. So what's the next thing? It is essential and paramount to build up and always continue to maintain it, our self-esteem. That is paramount. It is important to be kind and loving to ourselves. It is important to see the best in ourselves. It is important to see how we can make a difference in any situation, any circumstance. It is important to be the hero of our own story, where we rise to the occasion. No matter what happens, there we are to save the day. It is important to build up a positive mental self-image. The negative self-judgment, that negatively impacts your self-image. So we've already said we have to avoid that. But the second thing, we have to build up that self-esteem. Build it up. There is no person that is like you. None. You have a unique blueprint within you that no one else has. Even if you have a twin, they don't have it either. They got their own blueprint. You have a unique blueprint. And as you step into the fullness of who you are, that blueprint makes a difference in this world when you're not afraid to show it. You know, I talked about Judaism in many of my talk, and it's older than Christianity. It preceded Christianity, and they have a lot of traditions that I like to share, because there's some good things in all cultures and all religions. And so when I find them, I don't care if it's Judaism, I don't care if it's Buddhism, I don't care what it is, I'm going to share it with you guys. I'm one of those people that I just, guess what? And I tell people what I've learned, okay? So But what they teach their children from an early age is that they are wonderful. They're beautiful. Everything was given to them by God. And the only thing that's theirs is the choices that they make. And that's it. Everything else was given by God. So don't get the big head. What was given by God? You know, it was given for you for a purpose. And so that instills something at an early age into those children. It instills seeds of greatness into their children. And I'll be honest, I'll share something with you. My mother used to do the same thing with me. My mother brainwashed me into believing in myself. She told me how wonderful I was, how brilliant I was, how I could do anything at all. And oh my goodness, every day when I came home from school, she would want to know what I learned. So she would sit me down. So I would share with her everything that I learned in school. And so certain things, after I would tell her what was going on, there were certain things that she would tell me, give me an affirmation. Okay, that's good, all right. And there were certain things she was like, oh no. What do I teach you? That I can do anything? That's right. And tomorrow, when I drop you off at school, I'm going to talk to your teacher, and I'm going to make sure that she understands that. And so here I am with my little lunch box, my little lunch pail and stuff like that, and she's like reading this teacher the riot act as far as like what she teaches her son. And I teach Stephen this, and you will not tell him differently. And I'm like all afraid and stuff like that, looking up and everything, and that's how my mother was. She would not allow anyone to negatively impact my belief system. And I'm grateful for that. The next thing, we have to be mindful of the stories that we tell ourselves. Okay? We have this little voice. You all know what I'm talking about. Everybody got this little voice that spins the narrative and talks and tells us things and stuff like that. Now this voice, I've talked about this in previous talks. This voice is a direct pipeline to our unconscious beliefs. So it will constantly tell us that which we believe. So if you want to know what it is that you believe so you can straighten it out, listen to that little voice. It'll tell you exactly. It'll tell you. You don't have to go to therapy. I mean, I'm not saying don't go to therapy, but that little voice will give you a cue. It'll let you know exactly the story that you're telling yourself. It'll tell you. And people that you interact with and things like that, they'll say, yeah, they're probably da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. You know? That little voice will tell you what you believe. Now that voice, human beings, the average human being, and this is, as we continue to work on our self-image to make it a more positive self-image, this changes by the individual, but on average, we have a negativity bias. The average human being is negative, has a negativity bias, or has a bias towards believing the negative. That's why they say that one negative thing that you say, you have to say about 5 positive things to overcome it. That's just how we're wired. Now you can do something to impact that, but that depends on us. That depends on us. We gotta be accountable. So it's also in following with what I'm saying, it's important to reframe things. And what I mean by reframe things is when you hear that little voice telling you a story, telling you a tale, and things like that, you can reframe it. In other words, find a positive story. Find a positive story, because if you don't have the information, you only have this voice. Find a positive story that fits in. And tell yourself that until the actual truth reveals itself. I mean, if you're going to believe a story that's not based on any factual information, might as well be a positive one, right? You don't have the facts, so you're just making up this story to fill in the gaps, and it tends to be negative. Tell yourself a positive one. I had a friend that was just telling me, as a matter of fact, about, she was trying to get to know someone. And so after interacting with this person, next thing you know, she said that he ghosted her. Now, for those of us that don't know what ghost means, it's when, in the dating world, when someone, you're communicating via text or phone calls and things like that, and next thing you know, they just disappear like a ghost. All right? And so she was feeling really bad about it. She was like, what did I do? I'm like, come on, why does it have to be you? Why does it have to be your fault? Why does it have to be your fault? Tell yourself something different. Tell yourself a different story. How could I possibly tell a different story about this? Maybe he found love. Maybe he found love. How about that? You don't know the truth. You don't know what happened. So why don't you just tell yourself a story that makes you feel better? It's not about him. It's about how you feel. Now, wouldn't you be happy for him if you found love? Okay. Wouldn't you want to find love? Okay. So just bless him and let him go. Reframe it. And that's a technique that we can all use. In any type of situation when we're in doubt about something, and before we start beating up on ourselves, thinking that it's our fault, reframe it. It's about you. It's about your self-image. It's about how you feel about yourself. And nothing to do with them. Happens to me. I had just finished a final essay in ministerial school. And I was talking to my mentor, and I was saying, I turned in my paper a week and a half ago. I haven't heard anything from my instructor yet. Was it that bad? Yeah. And that's what I thought. And that's when my mentor actually told me that little gem that I'm sharing with you. He said, what happens when I have a story going on? I just tell myself a better story until the truth actually comes out. And so that's what I did. I told myself a better story. And right then, I got an email from my instructor that I got an A. I was about to beat up on myself. The next thing, and this is all on the inside, these are things that we can do. We have complete control over these things. The next thing is give yourself a pass. I've talked about this too. Give yourself a pass. Let yourself make it. Start showing love to yourself. Let's take a look at the nature of mistakes. Because a lot of times when we beat ourselves up, it's because of a mistake. All right? Now, mistakes are how we learn. That's how we learn. I mean, when you take away the emotion and all that other stuff and whatever story you're telling yourself, stuff like that, if you didn't make the mistake, you wouldn't have learned a lesson. So I want you to think about that. Now, if you wouldn't have learned a lesson, you wouldn't have experienced the growth that you experienced as a result of making a mistake. So that just means that we don't understand the nature of mistakes. These aren't deliberate mistakes. If it's a mistake, it's a mistake. That's all there is to it. Don't beat yourself up over the mistake. Give yourself a pass. let yourself off the hook. You deserve it. You are worth it. Because if you're not going to show love to yourself, how can we expect someone else to show us love? Now, those are the things that we can actually control on the internal, on the inside. Those are the things that we can actually do to preserve and build up our self-image. Now, on the external side of things, we don't have control over how people respond to us and people's opinions and how they communicate with us. We have no control over that. So I'm going to share a quick, real short story. I was teaching an ACIM study group. I facilitated an ACIM study group each week. And one of my classmates told me that I reminded them of this Unity minister. And they didn't know I actually knew this Unity minister, that, this Unity minister is actually a mentor of mine. And as a matter of fact, the things that I've been telling, some of the things that I've told you, as far as like tell yourself a different story, that came from this Unity minister who's my mentor I talk to every week, but they didn't know that. It was like, you remind me of this person. And so they were telling me all these wonderful things about this Unity minister. And so I said, I can't wait to tell him all these great things that I heard. And so on my next weekly session with him, I told him, I said, I heard a lot of good things about you. And so he was like, you have, really? I said, yeah. So I told him everything, and then he said, one thing I'll say, when it comes to people and their opinions, take it all with a grain of salt. And that kind of, because this is all good stuff. This is no bad stuff. It's all good stuff. I'm like, you don't want this? You don't want this good stuff? You don't want to hear all this good stuff? Really? Because see, me, I would have wanted the good stuff. Give me the good stuff. Yes, thank you. Yes, I appreciate it. He said, no. He said, take it all with a grain of salt, because he said, people are people. And you catch them on a good day, they may have some good things to say. Everybody's going through their own thing. You catch them on a bad day, they may not have good things to say. So the best thing to do is just take it all with a grain of salt. If it's good, hey, thank you. Don't let it go to your head. And if it's negative, hey, don't let it go to your head. Take it with a grain of salt. That became a mantra of mine. I began to look at different areas in my life on how I interpreted external information, external opinions, and people telling me, oh, you're all this in a bag of Skittles, and you're all that. And so I'm like, yeah, thank you. So when they weren't doing it, I was like, hey, why you not doing it anymore? What's going on? I'm not a bag of Skittles anymore? What's the problem? Come on with it. I'm the best thing since toast, right? So that taught me a lot. Okay? That definitely changed the approval programming that I had in my mind. And so I began to divest myself of external opinions. Because see, what others think of me is none of my business. But what I think of me that defines who I am and shapes and molds me in my life. So yeah, that's great. Whatever it is that you think, you're entitled to think. But I'm not going to define my mental self-image based on what you think, whether it's good or whether it's bad. Either or. So it is important to divest ourselves from our dependency of external approval. That is important. That also is important as far as this self-image. We're talking about protecting this self-image of ours and allowing it to nurture and grow. And these are techniques you can do to continue to move towards that authentic self that is already within you. Two more points on the external. Just like we have a self-image, an image of self, we also have an image of other people in our minds. You see, we can't experience people directly. We'd actually have to be linked into their consciousness, okay? But we have mental ideas of who they are and how they are. So, for example, however many people are in here, okay, you all have a mental image of me, for example. You know? And if I were to be able to experience directly these mental images that you have of me, I would be like, who is that stranger? It would not match up with my own self-image. Okay? This is important. This is very important. This right here is where we talk about when you are a certain way to people, towards people, you're really being that way towards yourself. So whether you're directing love or malice towards someone, there is a mental self-image that you have of this person in your mind. And you think that you're directing this malice towards them, okay? And maybe they will experience it if you say something, you know, verbally abusive or whatever, but really there's a mental image, and guess who created that mental image? You created that mental image. You just created a scapegoat for it. Everybody know about scapegoats, right? Well, scapegoats is something for thousands of years, and as a matter of fact, in Judaism, they would sacrifice one goat, and the other goat, they would put the sins of the village onto this goat and send it into the wilderness. It was the scapegoat. Now you can see that now, where people will blame other people for how how this country is and things like that, or how they how this is actually impact. It's your fault. No, it's not their fault. You've created a scapegoat. This is your mental representation of people, and now you're actually putting negative energy on it. But guess where that negative energy is really going, in fact? It's going back to you. It's your mental self-image, not theirs. Now you can say something to them and they might be able to infer that you have a problem with them, okay? But at the same time, you are receiving just as much, if not more damage, because see, they may not even respond in the way that they're even impacted, because they may be taking it with a grain of salt. And so the only person that's getting hurt at that point is who? That's right. That's right. So, don't think that science and spirituality are so different that they're just like that. No. This is science that I'm talking about. And spirituality says the same thing. Forgive and you'll be forgiven. Judge not and you won't be judged. Because if you're judging these self-images, you're really judging yourself. You created a self-image. That's right. Now, the reason why I'm sharing all of this is so that you can take this information and do what you will with it. But I tell you what you won't have is you won't be ignorant of it. It's going to be somewhere. You don't have to mess with it right now, but it's there. Now at least you know. know. Now, you choose to do with it what you will. But unless you can find a way to forget about what I'm saying so that you can go ahead and look at things as far as being the victim, you're no longer the victim. So where do we go from here? Where do we go from here? Well, it's important to understand that everybody that we meet is going to fall into two different categories. Everybody in our life is going to basically fall into two different categories. They're going to be those that agree with us and those that do not. Okay? Now, those that agree with us, I like to call them our cheerleaders. And cheerleaders are good. You know, they're good, you know, for the self-image and stuff like that. They make you feel good that, you know, hey, you know, I'm doing some things okay and stuff like that. I got some people on my side and everything. That's good. Now, the people that do not, those are our teachers. Our teachers are how we experience the greatest amount of growth, not our cheerleaders. Our teachers, that's right, those that challenge us, those that don't get along with us, those are our saviors. Because they push us from that small feeling as far as staying small. They force us to grow. Now we can try to bypass it, we have a choice with that. We could try to bypass it or just continue trying to be the victim and things like that. And it's their fault, I can't stand them, da, 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 da. But they're still our saviors. Because they push us to expand beyond the comfortable confines of where we are in consciousness. That is how we grow. So next time you have someone that disagrees with you on things, maybe you might look at it a little bit differently. You might look at that person a little bit differently. Because no one is truly against us. Even if they think that they are. With everything that I told you about mental self-images and things like that, those people are really against themselves. Hostilities and things like that they actually have more of it towards themselves than they could ever have for you. And it's still up to you whether you decide to take it all in or take it with a grain of salt. It's up to you. You are the masters of your fate. So let's take all that into meditation. And let's go within. Into the vast and expansive space that is within you. As you move within, allow your consciousness, whenever it is ready, to gently go over whatever aspect of this discussion was interesting to you. Allow yourself to experience open contemplation of your potential, of your beauty, of your authenticity. As you contemplate in these tranquil moments of silence, what was heard and experienced by you, allow yourself to experience a beautiful presence that lives within you. Allow yourself to be willing to hear this beautiful presence. As it continuously attempts to speak to you. Envision this presence saying the words, "You are my beloved child, in whom I am well pleased." If you are willing, allow yourself to experience the potential of a change of perception of yourself. Knowing that as you begin to cultivate and enrich and harmonize your self-image, so will you cultivate and harmonize your experiences in this world. And so we are grateful for the indwelling divine spirit that lives within each and every one of us. And so it is. Amen. So, brothers and sisters, this holiday season, Merry Christmas and Happy Hanukkah, Happy Kwanzaa, joyous winter solstice. Well, this is a time of joy for all our brothers and sisters. Now go and be that light that your Father, Mother, God intended for you to be. Thank you.